we're having, and this one is for pastoral staff and those that are in the church evangelization ministry, and so we're happy to have you here. And just to give you something about Father Joe, I met Father Joe during my novitiate trips that we were doing back in 2006, and we spent an hour and a half with Father Joe Gallagher here in Grand Rapids at the time when the CIC was in Ionia. And Father Joe was so animated about the Holy Spirit. It's amazing. And so it was good for novices, for us who are just exploring the Paulist and its mission, to hear Father Joe speak about the actions of the Holy Spirit in the church and in each one of us. And so it is quite good, quite energizing to start the first legacy, the Joseph Gallagher legacy presentation with Sister Maureen and Sullivan, and because this is a platform for us to talk about the Holy Spirit in the life of the church and life of each one of us through that. Sister Maureen Sullivan, welcome.
Thank you.
Dominican Sister of Hope in New York, and after 26 years of teaching theology, imagine, she had to deal with a lot of people who are like us, I guess, wanting to explore theology and all the questions that lie with that.
Even harder, they were undergraduates.
Oh, okay. God bless you.
They weren't all that interested at times to answer these questions.
That's correct. She's now Professor Emerita at St. Anselm College in New Hampshire. And she also serves as a religion consultant for the William Sadler Publishing Company. Sister Maureen was a very popular speaker at the LA Congress, and she's written 2 books on Vatican II, 101 Questions and Answers on Vatican II, and The Road to Vatican II, Key Changes in Theology. Let's give Sister Maureen a warm Michigan welcome.
Thank you all. Thank you so much. It is a warm welcome, and from a girl or a lady who was born and raised in New York City, in Manhattan, where, if you've been there, you know the speed is rather frenetic in New York. And then you come to, well, I went to Detroit first, and then on to Grand Rapids. There's no question when people talk about moving toward the Midwest, the change of speed, the change of level of friendliness and openness. It's just a matter of fact. I don't say that to you to humor you or to compliment you because I'm here. I've been touched by the friendliness of people at the airport, people at my hotel, everything. You're in friendly territory. There's no question about that. When I got here, that became very clear to me, and I want to thank you. And all of you here at the center have made me feel extremely welcome, and I'm really very delighted that those of you who showed up today are here. I'm hoping to make it worth your while. This visit has been a long time in the coming. A while back ago, Dan Pearson first contacted me, and it might be over a year and a half ago that we began discussing the possibility of my coming to speak here. But for various reasons, we could never find a date that seemed to work for us. But when Dan and I first talked, we were looking at 2 major events that would be happening in the church at the time that seemed to be a perfect topic for me to address. We were looking at Pope Francis opening up the Year of Mercy and the closing of the Second Vatican Council, both on December 8th, 2015. So I actually was coming here last December. Long story short, I didn't come last December, all right? And so we finally decided I would finally come here today. And in a way, those topics still are the focal point of my presentation. The Year of Mercy is going to conclude on November 20th, just a few weeks from now. And I say that these events are still appropriate because I'm only hoping that this Year of Mercy that we have enjoyed due to the invitation of Pope Francis in his desire to unveil the depth of the absolute unconditional love that God has for creation will continue. We will have used that year as a stepping stone as we move forward. And of course, the beginning of the Year of Mercy, coincided with the very special anniversary of the 50th anniversary of the closing of the Second Vatican Council, which was convened by one of my great heroes, Pope John the 23rd, or as we more lovingly call him now, St. John the 23rd. My cat, Giovanna, is named after John the 23rd. So I just want to get that out there right away, that I am obsessed, that there is an illness here, and that I have an obsession with the council. So Giovanna awaits me at home. But Vatican II, as it is called, was a watershed moment not only for the Roman Catholic Church, but also for the world at large. And for those of us old enough to remember that era of the church, we have a better idea of what I'm about to say. John's council greatly renewed the Catholic Church, and it significantly redirected Catholics toward the world outside of itself and our dialogue with others in the world. In his opening remarks of the council, he made it clear he was addressing everything that was happening at Vatican II, not only to Roman Catholics, but the entire human family. I don't know if you understand how significant that is, but it was major. All previous councils had been addressed to my brothers in Christ, primarily to his brother bishops, and then from his brother bishops on to their constituents in local dioceses, and on until it reached us. This was, we opened our doors to all of humanity. It was a major breakthrough. Now, every theologian has a special area for which they have a particular passion. As I hope will become clear during my time with you this afternoon, Vatican II is my passion. And I'm happiest when I have the opportunity to talk about Vatican II and share this passion with others. I loved teaching a course on Vatican II at my previous college, although I must admit that every semester it would pain me to have a new group of freshmen, sophomores, juniors, or seniors, whenever they took the course, to find another group of students who had not heard anything about Vatican II. Some of these people went to Catholic schools in elementary and high school, and they really did not know anything about Vatican II. So on the one hand, it pained me, but on the other hand, I considered it quite a privilege, because then it gave me the opportunity to introduce a new generation to the Second Vatican Council. Part of my passion for this moment in church history is that it affected my life personally. I entered my religious congregation, the Dominican Sisters, in August of 1965, and in December of that year, Vatican II would end. And so I entered right on the cusp of pre-Vatican II religious life, enough that I saw what it was like and what they wanted to change as a result of it. And so when I saw, and not that everything before was bad, we had many wonderful things about religious life, but some things needed to be clarified and needed to be cleaned up a bit, and Vatican II gave us the impetus, the strength to do that. And I honestly believe, and maybe I make too much out of it, but I tell people frequently, I don't know that I would be a Roman Catholic Dominican sister today had it not been for Vatican II. Because for me, it made religious life reasonable, it made religious life healthy, and for 51 years, I have had a blessed life. That doesn't mean I haven't been ill, had no heartaches, had no sadness. I have had a blessed life, and I am happy that I am a religious, and part of that is Vatican II, who helped me to see it as a healthy way of living for an American young woman in 1965 and beyond. So now when Dan and I finally settled on a date for this visit, we agreed that the focal point would be Pope Francis's vision for the church. Now I was happy about that because, for one thing, I would be able to still speak about Vatican II. Because there is no way I can speak about Francis, our current Pope, without his connection to John the 23rd and Vatican II. There simply is no way. When he announced the Jubilee Year of Mercy, he stressed the great need to keep Vatican II alive. Among other things, and I thought about when Father René spoke at the beginning, one of the reasons we have to keep it alive, Francis said, is because it was a true breath of the Holy Spirit. It was palpable that we could feel the Holy Spirit working in the church at that time. Francis was not at Vatican II, all right? But there is no question. He is a priest clothed in the grace and the spirit and the theology of Vatican II, as I hope to make clear to you. And the criticisms some in the hierarchy are leveling at Francis today are essentially the same criticisms that they leveled at John the 23rd, who had the courage and the farsightedness to call for a prophetic church. Well, in 1959 is when he made the call. He wanted a prophetic church that would be open to read the signs of the times. We've heard that expression many times. And we're talking much more than about, road signs and whatever. It's what is happening in the real life experience of the people of God. Those things are speaking to us. We must address those questions. We don't tell them what the questions are. They tell us what the questions are. That's where we come in as their leaders. On the 50th anniversary of the closing of the Vatican II, Francis maintained that the anniversary cannot be remembered, and not everyone would agree with him about this. He says the anniversary cannot be remembered only for the legacy of the 16 documents that it issued. Rather, he says, the council was an encounter. There are those in the church today who say, oh, some of you make so much of a big deal about Vatican II. Look, bishops came together, they issued 16 documents, and we are bound by the reading of those documents and go no further than that. And then you have the other theologians who are saying, yeah, we have the 16 documents, but Vatican II was more than just a meeting where we issued 16 things. It was an encounter. Those bishops went to Rome in 1962 and came back different men, many of them. They were educated by the Holy Spirit for those 4 sessions. But it was an encounter between the church and the men and women of our time. Now, I have been studying Francis ever since the day he was elected, because ecclesiology is my field. Almost from the first day of his election, I began to see the similarity between him and my hero, Pope John the 23rd. And the similarity is really at the heart of my talk to you this afternoon. I believe that Francis's vision of the church of the future is one that continues the vision of John the 23rd. In many ways, to speak about one is really to speak about the other. They are separated by 50 years, but as I'm about to say later on, they must have been separated at birth and raised separately and then found each other or something. It is just amazing how similar they are. Now, a qualifying note should be made here. My respect, my admiration, my great words for these 2 popes in no way is meant to detract from the 4 men who served as Pope between John and between Francis. We've been blessed in modern times with incredibly holy men in the papacy who occupied the chair of St. Peter. And any one of you who have studied the history of the papacy, you will attest to this fact. You need only to recall the Borgia Pope, all right, of 1492, 1503, Alexander VI, to know we have had some popes at times that really did not live, I'll just put it that way, did not live up to the measure. They're on Netflix if you want to watch and see how very, very bad they really are, all right? But each of these 4 men brought their own personal gifts to the papacy. My purpose, though, today is to celebrate our current Pope and comment on his vision for the church. One of the best ways I can do that is to compare him to John the 23rd and to showcase what John's council achieved because it is very clear that, as I said before, Francis is a man clothed in the spirit and the grace of Vatican II. John convened Vatican II in October 1962. He had announced it 3 years earlier in '59, to the horror of the Curia members who were in attendance at a meeting at St. Paul outside the walls that day. It would be Pope Paul VI who would oversee the last 3 sessions of Vatican II. Despite the fact that John was only present at 3 of the sessions, at the 1 of the 4 sessions, if you read the 16 documents, there is no doubt he left his imprint not only on the Council Fathers, but on the Council documents as well. And if we had more time today, I would love to just point out to you the mark of not only John the 23rd, but of some of the contemporary theologians who were working in the decades leading up to Vatican II. Marie Dominique Chenu from France, another Dominican father, Yves Conver, Jesuit Henri de Lubac, Jesuit Karl Rahner. Not only were they working in what was considered the new theology, they were also being silenced by the official church in those decades leading up to Vatican II. And so you can open up those documents, and by the way, after being disciplined by the church, it would be John the 23rd who would invite them to come to the council and serve as what is called periti, which means theological experts at the council. So he rehabilitated these once villain theologians. So after John the 23rd, the church celebrated 4 other popes. We had Pope Paul VI, who oversaw the last 3 sessions of the council. We had poor John Paul I, who lived only 33 days into his papacy, followed by John Paul II, who lived, forever? Was it? I think it was 27 years, but I'm not sure. And then we had Benedict XVI, who, first time in how many years, in 2,000 years, with the exception of one other time, I think, resigned the papacy, retired from the papacy, and opening it up to his successor. And then after Benedict's resignation in 2013, the conclave elected, to my delight, Jorge Bergoglio, who, as we know, took the name of Pope Francis, from the very first day he was elected. And he came out to the balcony to greet the church. I have seen signs of the theological and the pastoral sensitivity that he shares with John the 23rd. The man the cardinals elected in 2013, I believe, is a great gift to our church. And as I said, the more I study Francis, the more I believe they were separated at birth, allowed to live in 2 different places and 50 years apart, and then, whoops, there they are together. Now, I'm not the only person to ask the question, is Francis another John the 23rd? There were all sorts of articles written about that after his election. In an article that was written by Joshua McElway about 3 weeks after the conclave, the author commented on the mood in Rome after Francis's election. He claims that comparisons were being made to other popes, but the one particular comparison that kept coming forward was a comparison to John the 23rd. Well-known church historian, Jesuit Father John O'Malley, claims that Francis's actions thus far as Pope have been projecting precisely the image of church imagined by the Second Vatican Council. We saw him holding Holy Thursday services in a youth detention center rather than in St. Peter's Basilica. He washed the feet of not only 12 young adults, but 2 women, 2 Muslims. Reconciliation with our separated brothers and sisters was a key concept for John the 23rd. There is no doubt that this is what Francis is interested in, to reconcile with all of our brothers and sisters, not only those in Christian denominations, but to make peace with all of humanity. I'm really sorry. Pope John the 23rd at Vatican II expressed in his allocution to the council on the opening speech, on the opening day, he wanted the council to show that the church was the loving mother of all, the patient and full of goodness and mercy toward the children separated from her. It would seem that through word and gesture, Francis is demonstrating the image of this church. Now, before providing additional examples of the similarities and how they sort of are prototypes of each other, it would be helpful, I think, to say something about the development of the modern papacy. Because I think in knowing a little bit of the history of how the papacy has been coming about, it will make the papacies of these two popes all the more remarkable. So, briefly, in my study of the papacy, I found that the history of the papacy is one of creation and then one of decay, and of the shelving of many of the theological, political titles that we use to describe the power of the Bishop of Rome in the church and in the world. We've seen it. He was the primate of Italy. He's called the sovereign of Vatican City-State. He's apostolic Lord. I remember the first time I saw the movie The Agony and the Ecstasy, I couldn't believe it when whoever the Pope was that commissioned Michelangelo walks into the Sistine Chapel in full armor, going off to France or somewhere to go to war. I said, this is the Pope? I was so naive. I thought they all wore white cloaks and white hats and cute shoes. I didn't envision them wearing armor until I saw the Borgia Pope, all right? But they were building up titles because they were living in, there were socio-economic, political, all sorts of forces that were impacting a holy entity. Gregory VII in the 11th century introduced the definition of the Roman Church as omnium ecclesiarum mater, meaning that the Church of Rome, as opposed to the church in Michigan, or the church in Grand Rapids, or the church in New Rochelle, New York, those would be local churches, all right? But the Church of Rome is not only the center and the link, but it is the source and origin of all other churches. By the way, famous Dominican father and theologian Yves Congar believes that a terrible shift began in the history of the church with Gregory VII in the second millennium, because we shifted from an ecclesiology that followed the model of the New Testament church to an ecclesiology that followed what we're about to see now, following Gregory VII. With his document, Dictatus Papae, if you've never read it, it's incredible. In 1075, Gregory VII established virtually no limit to papal authority. No limit. None whatsoever. And by the way, if any of you do want a copy of this talk, I have no problem with emailing you a copy once I get home, because I know sometimes people like to take notes, and if you would like it, I have no problem. I can send it through the Catholic Information Center, and you can get it from them. No limit to papal authority. And then under Pope Innocent III in the 12th century, we see the transition happening from calling the Pope the Vicar of Peter, meaning St. Peter, the first Pope. Now he's the Vicar of Christ, which adds to the importance and the significance of who becomes Pope. And then the cream on the cake with Innocent IV, 1243 to 54. This focus on papal power will now be perfected with a description of the Pope as a ruler who is above the law. He doesn't have to follow the law. Now that is a Roman principle, in Roman government in the time. This is now applied by Pope Innocent to the papacy. The Roman papacy would continue to grow between the medieval age of Christianity and the modern age, reaching its peak at Vatican I. And don't be surprised. You and I sitting here right now are still feeling the effects of Vatican I, which was 1869, 1870. All right, this growth was possible due not only to the definition of infallibility, which Pius IX pressured the Council Fathers to include at Vatican I in 1869, but also due to the concentration of power in the Church in Rome as never before in the government of the Church. All of this continued to grow, almost 100 years, until Vatican II, when we have the first movement. Now, these theologians I mentioned before, they were working at turning the tide and getting rid of some of these papal titles and ermine capes and some of the things that prop them up to be other than what they were. We are all the people of God. Baptism puts us on an equal plane. But we have the first movement to reduce papal power and papal titles. The Second Vatican Council, no question about it, opened what we call micro fractures in the ecclesiology of the papacy and the ecclesiology of the episcopacy. And I'm assuming most of you know when I use the word episcopacy, I mean anyone, a member of the episcopate it comes from the Greek word episkopoi, bishop. So episcopacy is the bishops. And Vatican II sought to rethink the theology both of the papacy and of the episcopacy. According to some commentators, this opening made it possible for Pope Benedict to actually pass the papacy on to a successor by resigning, an act that had been described as a dramatic transition from one model of papacy to another. We're looking at black and white here. And this doesn't, I mean between Benedict and Francis. This doesn't mean yay one, not so yay the other. It just means different model of ecclesiology at work here. There's just no question about it. But this enabled an opening, and in walked Francis. One of the goals of Vatican II was restore what they called a more traditional, but not traditionalist. And I don't know if you know what I mean by the difference. Traditional would mean, let's hearken back to the fathers in the early church and the New Testament. Traditionalist is more of a, the way we've always done it, and we want the power. It's more like a literalist understanding of church power. But we wanted a balance in ecclesiology. It would involve eliminating some grandiose titles, all right, powers that the papal office took on, as did episcopal offices in the second millennium, between Gregory VII and the beginning of the 20th century. After Benedict's resignation, the Roman pontificate was set to reformulate itself. And this change paved the way for Francis. The conclave that elected Francis had the potential to mark a turning point for the Catholic Church. And I am hoping and praying that that is what we're here about today. I think that keeps you hopeful. It's what keeps me hopeful, that we are at a turning point for our church. Judging from his actions thus far, it would seem that Francis is restoring the church to an image closer not only to Vatican II, but also to the New Testament model of church that was there. One of the things I said to someone before we began today, Jesus did not leave a blueprint for church. Jesus was Jewish, so he really wasn't intending a church. Maybe a good synagogue, a great temple, but was not. And even on Peter, I will build this, build my church. We are told by biblical scholars today that that is a post-resurrection formulation. All right? So Jesus did not leave a blueprint. What these early apostles did was, as needs arose, they developed structures that would meet the needs of the people. For as long as the structures work, we should keep them. Guess what? The structures aren't working for us anymore. The structures for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years for the Roman Catholic Church has been presbyter, bishop, pope, bishop. All right? And that gave us plenty enough vocations, and it kept the ball rolling. It doesn't work anymore. It's not feeding us vocations. We're closing parishes. We're lumping them all into one. Where I came from in New Hampshire, you had the French-Canadian parish now lumped with the parish of that basically catered to the needs of the St. Anselm College. Two completely different sets of needs on this group, on these groups of people, but they were pushed in together, on committees together. How do you form that community? You don't. And so the needs of the community took a backstage to filling the churches. Our structure needs attention, but we're afraid. Apparently, some are afraid. I'm not at all afraid. If they ask my advice, I would be happy to share it with them. But it's an ecclesiological principles. Structures they do not come from dogma. Revealed truths about God come from dogma. The structures we developed in order to facilitate the spread of the good news. When the structure fails, the intelligent person would say, change the structure. Get one that works. That would be my take. Anyway, the very first acts of Francis were marked by discontinuity of style when compared with Benedict. Now granted, these discontinuities are not crucial. They're not essential to the papacy. For example, his choice of name. That he took one that had never been used before, we know there was another reason why he took it. But his emphasis on his ministry is very telling. He doesn't call himself Pope. He calls himself his real name, Bishop of Rome. That is his title. He becomes the Pope when he's elected the Bishop of Rome. But he is first and foremost the Bishop of Rome. And that's how he calls himself. He sees himself as a bishop. And not to mention where he took up his residence. He is not living in the apostolic palace. Granted, not a big deal. Maybe he's just lonely and likes to be around people. And St. Martha provides more people. I'm not trying to put a whole lot of stock in it. I'm just simply saying, you can't miss these tell signs, all right? Perhaps what we remember most, or what I remember best, following his election was his opening speech. He told the crowd at St. Peter's Square, and now we take up this journey, bishop and people. This journey of the church in Rome, which presides in charity, a journey of fraternity, of love, of trust among us. Then came the gesture that touched the hearts of so many observers. The new Pope said, and now I would like to give you my blessing. But first I ask a favor of you. I ask that you pray to the Lord that he will bless me. Let us make in silence this prayer, your prayer over me. Here again, Francis reminds us of the gentle warmth of John the 23rd, who told a late-night multitude years ago in St. Peter's Square, now go back home and give your little children a kiss, and tell them it is from Pope John. Many observers have noted the similarity between the two popes, separated by 50 years. One noting that, like John, Francis has a simpler approach to faith, evangelization, liturgical celebration, to many things. There's no question about it. One writer describes growing up in a church right after Vatican II, and he thought it was incredible that the bishops at the time thought, you know what, let's really take Vatican II seriously, and we'll envision a whole new kind of church where we're really engaged with the modern world and listening to the people of God for what their needs are. And this man who was writing years later was enthused for this. But progressives who embraced the council over the since in the last 50 years have lamented what they began to see in past papacies, what they saw as a loss in the consultative nature in top-down papal decisions, which continued, even though Vatican II sought to eliminate that. Something the bishops at Vatican II tried to eliminate. They wanted to emphasize collegiality. Collegiality is merely the shared governance of the church by the primary teachers of the church, who are the bishops of every diocese. They are the primary teachers, and they should have a share in the universal governance of the church. All right? This concept cannot be overemphasized for its importance because of the theological implication it has for what is called the local church. Funny story. When I was doing my graduate work at Fordham on the local church, on ecclesiology, you take comprehensive exams at the end of the coursework and everything else you have to do before you do the dissertation, I guess, which was enough to put me into an early grave. But no, I would wake up in the morning and I would say, so what? If I didn't finish the dissertation, would they put that on my tombstone? You know, here lies a woman that worked so hard, but ABD, all but dissertation, you know, that was gonna be my, anyway, you had to go through these silly comprehensive exams, and I had someone who was an unusual man, he wasn't all that kind. Anyway, this is how little I knew though when I got to those comprehensives. One of my questions was on the local church at Vatican II. You know, what did Vatican II tell us about the local church? I think I wrote something stupid about my parish church. You know, like, this is an easy question. The local church, I'd tell him all about Guardian Angel, where I went to school. Well, he was, of course, horrified at my answer, and rightly so. That's not what the theology of the local church was. It's so much more powerful. You have the universal church, which is an abstract quality. You and I cannot say after today's talk, hey, let's go make a visit in the universal church. It doesn't exist. Just like you can't say, hey, look, there's girlness walking down the street. No, we might say, there's Margaret walking down the street, because she represents girlness. Well, your church in this diocese and your church in this diocese are the local church, which represents this universal church. So it can mean a local parish, or, for the most part, what it really means is the American church, the Argentinian church, the Asian church. The point is, these are all churches with different needs, different languages, different cultural backgrounds. And if we want to be united, we're going to have to let them have a voice. So we cannot continue to clone the local church in Asia, you know, by going over and saying, Maylene is not a saint's name, so we'll baptize her Elizabeth. We're good to go now. No, it can't be that way. You know, we were simply cloning a Eurocentric Western theology, and because we thought we had to. We weren't being mean. But Vatican II came, it was like, you know, I could have had a V8 moment. It was, no, the local church is rich. Just like the Church of Jerusalem and the early church had needs that the Church of Corinth didn't have. You know, and the Church of Rome had needs that the church elsewhere, you know, it didn't need. And so they would build up structures to meet their needs. This is what Vatican II was saying. And collegiality would make that a possibility, because then the bishop of this diocese would have a voice for Grand Rapids, as the bishop of San Diego would have a voice for San Diego. Everything does not have to go to Rome to be settled under the principle of subsidiarity. The local church can handle its own to a measure. The election of Francis breathed new life into the possibility of a collegial church, and this is very important. The priests in the room will have maybe a better idea of what I'm about to say because of their walk of life and their networking that they have. Just look at the cardinals that Francis is choosing right now to lead the church. He is sending out a message with those names. There's no question about it. This is the kind of government that he wants his church to, and government may even be a strong word, but collegial nature that he is building with these cardinals. At the March 19th Mass, marking the beginning of his Petrine ministry, Francis returned to the themes he had already introduced in the first days of his papacy: poverty, goodness, tenderness, compassion, and authentic humility radiated from this Pope, at least for me. His first direct reference to Vatican II came in his March 20th, 2013 address to the fraternal churches and religions. He explicitly recalled John the 23rd and the decision to convene the council. He then cited one of the most controversial documents out of Vatican II, Nostra Aetate, the Declaration on the Relation of Church to Non-Christian Religions. This was a document that those of us introduced to the church before Vatican II could never have imagined. My students at St. Anselm College didn't even bat an eye when I told them what it said. It said, for one thing, The Catholic Church rejects nothing that is true and holy in these religions. Now, by non-Christian religions, we're talking Taoism, Buddhism, Hinduism, no relationship to Christianity, none whatsoever. I grew up saying, they're all going to hell. My elementary school teacher said there is one path to salvation, and it is the Roman Catholic Christian Church. There is no avenue. And I remember I must have been incredibly precocious as a child. I don't know where I lost it along the way, but I remember thinking, even the Jews? Because Jesus was Jewish. How could that be? He starts the religion and he can't be saved? Something doesn't fit right here, you know? Was I bright or what? All right? No wonder I got into so much trouble at school. No, but it did strike me as odd. And it pained me. I remember, I don't know how old I was, but I remember thinking, so by a luck of the draw, I get saved? I got born into a Roman Catholic family? And my next door neighbor didn't? You know, I look back on it now and I think of mixed marriages and I think of what we told the non-Roman Catholic partner in a mixed marriage. Though we permitted it, the person had to forgo his or her religion and promise to allow the children to be raised as Roman Catholics, which basically meant we had absolutely no regard whatsoever for their religion. I understand what brought us to that point, a literal reading of Scripture. I know that. So to come up, to have this man mention Nostra Aetate, as I said, one of the, or if not the most controversial documents at Vatican II. And by controversial, I mean the ones that the bishops fought over, all right? This is the one that Francis is quoting. Now, in the early days of Francis's papacy, two themes emerged, and they continue to shape his vision for the Church. First, as I mentioned before, a visible and undeniable recentering of the understanding of the Pope. It's from power to service, from papal court to the people. There is just no question about it. Really, I have been watching some of these historical docudramas on TV, and I cannot believe the disdain that in the Middle Ages members of the hierarchy had for the lower men and women. I honestly, I can't believe it. And then you see them in the next scene, they go and pray before a statue of the Blessed Mother, you know, asking for help that they can, you know, behead the enemy tomorrow without much fuss because they do want the fox hunt to occur, you know, and it's like, are they all crazy? You know, but so what you have here, may have taken us 2,000 years, but we're back. Power to service, papal court to the people. And this is not media spin. This is Francis's attempt to show the consequences. This is what happens when you take the gospel and translate it into what it would look like in the papacy. This is what a gospel papacy would look like. Francis said, and I think I want to write an article about this line because the line has intrigued me since I found it. It's not mine. All of this is stolen from somebody. All right, I haven't got an original thing in my mind, but I really put things together very well. All right, so please, if you want a copy of this, know it's from somebody. All right. Francis said, "Grace always escapes the control of the church." I love that line. God is bigger than whatever hierarchical handle we might have on something. Grace always escapes the control of the church. And it escaped, look at all the long time, I don't mean to bring up an ugly topic, but look how long the clerical abuse scandal was going on before we became aware of it. Grace always escapes the control. It may take a long time, but it does. And I love that thought. God is bigger than whatever human attempts to capture him in a box, in a creed, in a power structure, or whatever. It always escapes the control. And this is Francis' words, so I'm good ground here. I forgot I'm quoting him. It's okay. A church that does not go to the margins, and these are from my priest friends in the room, because he was speaking to you when he said this. A church that does not go to the margins offers a model of ministry that can result in priests being collectors of antiques instead of being shepherds living with the odor of the sheep. That was for you, guys. Secondly, there is the theme of mercy. When Francis convened the Jubilee Year of Mercy, he told us the following. It's a magnificent quote and deserves to be read out in full. Jesus is the face of the Father. We're on till 3:30? What time is it?
3 o'clock.
3 o'clock.
Quarter after 2.
Oh, and I have until?
3.
I got to talk faster than I was. All right. I only have like 55 pages to go. All right. Jesus is the face of the Father's mercy. These words, he said, might well sum up the mystery of the Christian faith. Mercy has become living and visible in Jesus of Nazareth. By his very person, Jesus reveals the mercy of God. Another line from Francis that I love. Mercy is the bridge that connects God and humanity, opening our hearts to the hope of being loved forever despite our sinfulness. These themes have continued to be at the heart of Francis's papacy, and it's hard not to compare him to John the 23rd in this regard. For both of them, they believed in an openness to change and the belief for the ongoing renewal of the church. It would mean abandoning symbols of power, and it would require an ecclesiological change in our point of view. The challenge is even greater because this involves shifting a church that has focused on the center, which is Rome, to now a church that focuses on Grand Rapids, on Detroit, on Japan, on Argentina, because God is coming through the grace of the individual, as we will see in a moment, through incarnational theology. There is a third component that is shared by both John and Francis, and it's really central, and I hope I will get through this sufficiently. It's at the heart of why they are so successful, I believe. They both embrace what is called an incarnational theology of the world. An incarnational theology of the world. This position rejects the pre-Vatican II notion that it had to impose a separation between itself and the world in which it lived. Basically, like the old, I'm looking at medieval towers, the moat and the walls built around it. We were within those walls in the church. And that sinful world was out to taint us. We had to separate ourselves from them. The popes of the 18th, 19th century had been battling forces of the modern world. As a result, they came to believe the best way to avoid crisis in the future would be to insulate the church behind a power structure that would claim to be self-sufficient and have all the answers. Enter the catechism. We have all the truths, we have all the questions. Not only do we have the answers, we have the questions too. And the answers. And so you know this and you are. That's all you need to know. You are but that would be me studying Taoism and studying all the tenets of Buddhism. That would not make me a Buddhist. It would make me someone who knows what Buddhists believe. All right? We have to learn that. They use different terms when they're talking about incarnational theology, John and Francis, but they mean exactly the same. John will forever be identified with the term signs of the times. All right? The same meaning that John had for that, Francis calls seeds of the word, with a capital W. The church's relationship with the modern world that they were all pushing for at Vatican II was really in keeping with an old idea, that the church was incarnational, meaning it was a community begun by the Word made flesh, by a God who chose to enter human history. As a result of the incarnation, theologians speak of a sacramental worldview. That the reality of God is mirrored in the world. I know it's late, I know it's warm, I know I should sing a song or something, but I'm going to try and make this exciting because this is maybe the key, most important point that I could be making. There's a principle called the creative principle, meaning something of a creator is always left in the created. So those of you with children, if I met your spouses and I met your children, I would say, oh, she looks just like you, or he looks just like your husband. You left something of yourself in that child, which is why they look like you. God left something of God in this world. We've claimed God is the creator of the universe, which means everything in this world can mirror the sacred. Everything is a potential sign of grace. Everything is a potential encounter with the divine. But we have to open our eyes to view where to look for it. We pass it by. I'm sure I pass it by time and time again. I did it yesterday on the plane. The man sitting next to me in the first flight, I know wanted to converse. But I was reading my talk over, and I didn't want to be, and I ignored him. He made several efforts, and I was polite, but I didn't, and I berated myself the entire way. Because what did I do? I came, maybe I'm better prepared for this, and I hurt that man's feelings. That was an encounter that I missed. Deliberately. I wasn't even just blind to it. I deliberately said, I don't want to talk in my mind, all right? So trust me, I'm on this journey with you, all right? If God is the creator of the universe and everything in this universe, we can find God in it all, which enables Francis to say, let's take another look at these irregular unions. Let's take a look at our gay brothers and sisters. Is not God living in and through these people? This is because the concrete, every chair in this room may look alike, but every chair in this building does not. And so this chair may be great for this room, but it's not going to work well maybe in the chapel or in the church. You need a different kind of chair for that. Each one of us needs to have the application of whatever the teachings of Jesus the Christ have been handed down to us, but in a way that will meet the needs of my individual union, my individual set of circumstances. This is what Francis is trying to say. This will not lead to relativism, which is what others have accused him of. Oh, well then you just do whatever you want, right? No, you don't do whatever you want. But every human is unique. Every human deserves to have someone sit down and have them be told, tell me as you see it in your light. Bandage A for Father Rene might not work for Father
Close enough.
Rick, Nick,
Dick.
Dick.
Pete.
It's Pete. Where did they get Dick from?
No, he's
Oh, he's just really. Like, I'm not crazy enough already. Okay. Okay, but do you see my point? They're both priests. But if I'm his bishop and they're a bishop and they both come to me and say, I've been unfaithful to my vows. I am not going to say, okay, both of you say 10 Hail Marys, 10 Our Fathers, and I don't know, drink a bottle of scotch this evening. Get over it. I'm going to want to hear what Father Rene had to say. What are his circumstances? Is it ongoing? Was there other circumstances? I want to hear. And this is not because I'm salacious, but because they're different men. Was Father Rene's woman married? This is what Francis is trying to say. That's what incarnational theology does. It makes each of us an image of God in a way that now maybe we can understand what it means you are created in the image of God. The sacred is in you, but you have been made to be who you are by your circumstances, by your parents and whatever, and that has to be respected. So what both John and Francis recognize is that grace, which is the very life of God, is available in and through our world. That means that everything that exists is at least potentially an encounter with the sacred. It is this incarnational thinking that makes John and Francis optimistic, makes them open, jovial, welcome, forgiving, compassionate, because they see you as a sign of grace, not as a problem, not as a sinner, not as someone who has not carried their cross properly. They're looking for God in you. I want their mindset. I pray every day for it. I mean that. I pray that every person I come across, I could look and say, let me look for that sacred glimpse, because I'll benefit from it. If no other reason than selfishly, I will benefit, because I saw God today. But I, yesterday, eliminated that possibility on the airplane of my own choosing. For John, the designation for this belief, sacramental worldview, as I said, he used signs of the times. Francis uses seeds of the holy, and for him, that term means this. Whatever is true and holy in the realities in which we live. Sounds an awful lot like Nostra Aetate. Whatever is true and holy in the realities in which we live. Meaning, we live in a world of grace. You can find God anywhere, and we had better be looking, because God is speaking me through Renee, through Dick, through the man on the plane yesterday. And I can listen to him speak to me, or I can say, not talking, okay? That's my choice. Therefore, what we find in both men then is what is required. If you're going to look at each case separately, guess what? You are going to have a pastoral approach in your theology, as opposed to a dogmatic one. Dogmatic is much easier, because what I do is I look up in the rule book and I say, infidelity as a priest. You know what that requires in the canon law? I just apply that equally to the two of them. Okay? Whereas if I have to listen to their stories and mull over it and pray over it and try to think how Jesus in the gospel would answer it, it takes a lot more time, but it treats them like human beings. It treats them like sacred human beings, which is what we've been asked to do. So what we find in both individuals is this emphasis on the concrete lived experience of the individual. Before you go on to give me your act of contrition, Father, and you, I want to know details. I want to know concrete realities. I want to know, is English your first language? Do you want to, seriously, all these little things make him who he is when he commits a sin. I need to know that if my advice is going to be a movement toward conversion for him. Otherwise, he becomes a number in my, how many confessions I heard today. But I didn't see anybody, I didn't meet anybody. But on the other hand, I'm going to be thinking about him if I see him in this way. It's an entirely different approach to pastoral theology. Now, what I'm going to mention here, and I don't have the time to go into it deeply, but I need to mention it because it is at the heart of this incarnational approach. Some of you may have heard of it in theology classes, but there was a major paradigm shift in theology. I can't get this straight in my head, 1:30 to 3. Okay, I got a half hour. We're on page 30. Okay. Before Vatican II, every academic discipline has what we call a methodology. Now I'm going to oversimplify the sciences, and I'm going to say the sciences use a 3-step methodology. They say, okay, step 1, what if? Hypothesis. Step 2, experiment. Step 3, make a judgment. So what if I mix red and blue? Step 2, do it. Experiment. Step 3, mix purple. That is a methodology that is used by the scientists. We can't use that kind of methodology in theology because ours cannot be verified in the same way that God can. I mean, that red and blue can. All right? There's a whole different type. We can verify. There are ways that we can legitimate the truths. It's not all fantasy. But we have to use a different methodology. In any event, before Vatican II, we used what is called a deductive methodology. Long story short, I'll send you the copy so you can read all the details. Deductive theology begins with the divine partner, God. And it finds everything it can find out about God, and it says, wow, God is all good, God is all holy, God is all forgiving, blah, 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 blah. All right. And then we came across a line in Scripture that said to us, be perfect as your Heavenly Father is perfect. And we said, no, we're done. All we have to do is take those perfections of God and impose them on the humans. Moral theology is done. All right? So good girls never lie. When they're 7, yeah, they do. They'd sell their own mother at 7. All right? Little good boys don't fight. If not, have them looked at. Okay? Because they do. All right? Now, no, good children don't lie. They do. Now, if they're still lying at the age of 32 and pathological at it, then I think they need help, right? What I'm saying is we did not take into account the human agent in the way we did our theology or our evaluation. We simply took those divine prescriptions, and I can remember in elementary school being told, be perfect as your Heavenly Father. God wouldn't do that. Good girls, good postulants don't have sexual thoughts. Yeah, they do, if they're human, okay? But there was no telling them that at that point, all right? You can't start with the divine partner. You have to start with the human partner. You have to start with what we know about the human person. So at Vatican II, these theologians who had been working for decades leading up to the council came to recognize we were starting with the wrong partner. Why don't we start with the human? And we do it in every other walk of life. I taught first grade for 11 years. There's no way I would have walked into a first grade class and say, let's do long division today. Because everyone would have just looked at me and said, well, we don't know how to add and subtract and multiply, and we need those 3 skills before we could do long division. So I would have to go where the kid is, start with the human condition and say, they need to learn to add, then to subtract, then to borrow, then to multiply. Now we're ready for long division. All right? We took people in all other academic disciplines, we find out what they know, what they're capable of, and then we know now a 7-year-old cannot commit a mortal sin. It's simply not possible. That's why we don't let them drive. We don't let them vote. We don't let them marry, because they are not capable of making that kind of deliberate judgment. All right? But we weren't doing that in religion. We were simply taking angelic behavior, divine behavior, and imposing it on humans. That's why confession lines were all around the block on Saturdays. Everything we did was a sin. Chewing gum in church, sin. All right? I mean, when you think about it, I wanted to yell at my sister, sin. Why? God wouldn't do that. God loves his sister if he had one. It's just, we finally realized that we need to say, but where are you and when you enter seminary, when you got married, you had to start at the very beginning and work your way towards a goal. This is what we finally realized in inductive methodology. And that's why John and Francis were so successful. They said, tell me what your world was like. When you go into your parishes, those of you who are priests, or those of you who are engaged in religious instructions, and you say, I'm new in this parish, you'd be crazy not to get someone who has the history of the parish and get the lowdown on what is going on in that parish. There's no way you can meet the needs of that parish without knowing where they are or what they know. Where do you start an adult religious education program if you have no idea what they've been exposed to? That is inductive theology. Now, perhaps the best example Vatican II gives us of an inductive approach is found in their document, Gaudium et Spes, which is the pastoral constitution on the church in the modern world. Before Vatican II, this document probably would have begun, because it was with the church, it would have said, the Church of Christ is, and it would have said all the glories, and then it would have simply imposed that on the lived experience of the people of God all over the world. They reversed it. And here's the first line of Gaudium et Spes. The joys, the hopes, the griefs, the anxieties of the followers of Christ, indeed, nothing human fails to raise an echo in our hearts. What they told the people in that document was, tell us your joys. Tell us what makes you happy. What are you anxious about? What are your griefs? We want to begin with the human person, and from there say, if that's what your world looks like, here's what your church can do for you. But we're going to work with you, but I need to know what you're like first. I need to know what you're facing first. This is what an interview is for. When you hire someone, you want to know where they're at. Now, for those of us introduced to the church before Vatican II, a line like that is astonishing. It wasn't a matter of where we were, it was a matter of what we were being called to be. Like Gaudium et Spes, like John, like Francis, it begins in the real world of men and women, taking the human condition seriously in its theologizing. Now, I should note here, this is precisely the methodology that Francis uses in his apostolic exhortation, The Joy of Love, Amoris Laetitia. The reason he can talk about irregular unions is he wants to know how your irregular union is different from his irregular union. It may require pastoral application of a certain sort. It is inductive. I want to know what yours is like. Relativism is only if you juggle the truth to meet what you want it to meet. Avoiding relativism means you know what the gospel is. And he's saying priests will have to be re-educated. They will have to be, taught how to deal with these kinds of intricate problems in the confessional. That is the only way of dealing. The inductive approach means everyone has their own lived experience. There's no other way that the gospel can take root and have meaning for people in the church. Theologian Gregory Baum once noted, only if religion becomes uncreative, repetitive, tied to the past, unable to bring forth new responses in the present, does it die in the hearts of men and women. We've had our moments of dying over the last 50 years. There have been new questions, there have been new needs. You can't let those questions go unanswered. People will go somewhere else for their answers. Inductive theologians analyze the human condition and they see my study of the human person naturally leads to questions about God. Why? We're the only species who can transcend the empirical world. You're the only ones who can ask, what if? No other species can do that. My poor cat is at home right now, and if that bowl goes empty and the man I have feeding her doesn't go in, I will kill him. But aside from that, if he doesn't go in, she is not going to go to that bowl and say, I wonder if Maureen is coming home tonight. She can't go beyond the physical bowl. So I can talk until I'm blue in the face to her to try to get her to, transcend and think about the possibilities of cat heaven. It's not going to happen. It's just not going to happen for her. But you can. You are able. So the study of the human person, you become a factor in doing theology. We look at you and we say, they're not satisfied with this world. Nothing here gives them perfect happiness. They want more. They were made for more. And that's why you have the theologians at Vatican II saying the dynamism of the human spirit can only be satisfied by God. St. Augustine said it, our hearts are restless until they rest in you. The psalmist says it. It is throughout our tradition. And where do we find that out? By studying you. What makes you happier? When you were 7, a trip through Toys R Us without a bill might have done it for you. Hopefully that wouldn't do it for you now. If it did, you need help. All right? But our understanding of what perfect joy is changes as we change. And so the question is, or maybe it's more what Paul said, eye has not seen nor has ear heard what God has prepared for those who love him. We can't imagine what heaven is like. We really can't. But we've got to take the human person seriously. And in taking the human person seriously, it means we have to take the human culture seriously. Remember I said before, in our missionary endeavors in the past, we often superimposed a Western, Eurocentric theology on local cultures. Each local church, whether you were in Asia, in Belgium, in Africa, in Brooklyn, wherever you were, same music, same language, same vestments, same ritual. If you close your eyes, you could have been in Rome. All right, it looked like the Church of Rome. So the theological implications of this paradigm shift are crucial. So far I've been saying wonderful things about John and Francis, but I don't have to tell you that not everyone is enamored with John and Francis in the world today, all right? When I speak about these two men, the concept of prophet comes to mind. We know that a prophet is someone who speaks on behalf of God, and that person is not always received well by their community, because no one wants to be criticized. No one wants to be critiqued, or be told that God is not happy with them. And so the people don't like the prophet. We know the cardinals that elected Angelo Roncalli thought they were getting an interim pope, a pasta-loving, jovial man who would, sit up and eat pasta, and, he was old, he was heavy. We'd have our marbles in place for the next conclave, and we'll elect someone that we want. Instead, 3 months later, he called the council. Ha, ha, ha. Anyway, they could not have imagined him doing that. Many in the hierarchy were utterly horrified by this decision, and they did not hide their horror. In a book entitled A Brief History of Vatican II by Giuseppe Alberigo, a letter is written to Giovanni Battista Montini. He would become Pope Paul VI after John XXIII, but he had been sent to Milan by Pope Pius XII as a punishment before Vatican II, because he was disagreeing with some of the philosophies of Pius XII. He gets a letter from this man in Rome, right after John has announced the calling of the council, and the letter says this: to Montini, the Rome that you know and from which you were exiled to Milan by Pius XII shows no sign of changing, even though it seemed it must change sooner or later. He goes on, after their initial fright, he's talking about the Curia members that were around John the 23rd when he announced the council, that he was calling a council. After their initial fright, the old buzzards are coming back, and they are coming with a thirst for new carnage and fresh revenge. That macabre circle is tightening around the dear head of John the 23rd. Without a doubt, they are back. Now, these old buzzards referred to are some in the inner circle of the Roman Curia, the very cardinals who helped to elect John the 23rd. In the book, Alberigo goes on to say, it was bitterly clear that an institutional isolation would characterize the papacy of John, when his own hierarchical collaborators would keep him out of much of the preparation for the opening of the Second Vatican Council. Even today, we find those who still revile John the 23rd. One of the main arguments against him is they accuse him of being a modernist. Now, before Vatican II, there was a movement that was looking for the church to reconcile itself with the modern world. Now, granted, some modernists had some bizarre positions, not all. In any event, John the 23rd was looked as a sympathizer for the modernists. When John was recently canonized by Pope Francis, one of the online sites of critics of any pope, by the way, after Pius XII, because all of them are looked as not real popes. The last real pope legitimate was Pius XII. It carried an article about Pope John the 23rd entitled, "A Saint He Ain't," which is really clever. It's so theological, Come on. The subtitle read, "What You Really Need to Know About St. John the 23rd, the Man Who Claimed to be the Pope of the Catholic Church in 1958. Underneath his photo is written the name, the anti-pope, John the 23rd. Francis also has his detractors, as you know. And some of these detractors can be found right in the inner circle of the Curia. In 2015, a prominent German monthly journal entitled the May issue, The Struggle for Rome, it reported on the internal criticisms of Pope Francis coming from his own advisors in the Curia. Now granted, some of these criticisms stemmed from the reactions they had to the scathing critique that the Curia was given by Francis in December of 2014. It included a list of 15 ailments that Francis claimed plagued the Vatican's power-hungry bureaucracy. In his critique, Francis portrayed a church hierarchy that had lost its humanity at times, a body consumed by narcissism, where men who are meant to serve God with optimism instead present a hardened, sterile face to the world. He went on to denounce the pathology of power that afflicts those who seek to enhance themselves above all else. In many places he has denounced clericalism. And any form of behavior in the priesthood that fails to honor the role of the laity, Francis has no tolerance for whatsoever. More than once he has talked about our call by virtue of our baptism and our confirmation, and that we need to be working together. And of course, Vatican II was the only council in the history of the Church that dedicated one of its own documents solely to the laity. And every layperson really probably should read that. Needless to say, the Pope's remarks did not sit well with the Curia when he critiqued them that day. One was quoted as saying, "The large stomach of the Vatican," meaning the Curia, "has not yet digested the last address of the Pope to the Curia. It still burns under the skin of many church officials." It would burn under my skin too, I'm sure, if I was called these things. But John and Francis believe in a radical discipleship. This is what they're calling for. You know, Francis has not been shy in his critique of the clergy who fail in their mission to the people of God. And he's not shied away from calling the rest of us to a conversion as the people of God. I want to move along simply because I want to get to the conclusion of today before my time runs out, and I don't want to hold you beyond that time. But I would be happy, as I said, to pass along. You know, as a good teacher, you're always taught to come with more information than less information, so you're ready for more, or they want you back for more, okay? But let me offer you some closing thoughts today. With the opening of Vatican II in 1962, John the 23rd began a theological and ecclesiological journey. It is my belief that given the words of Francis's words and his actions, he is continuing the journey begun by John. I feel that sincerely. And the primary goal of my time with you this afternoon was to point out what his vision for the church might look like. This theological and ecclesiological journey has met, both starting with John, has met with some resistance in the past 50 years. But with Francis's election, I see the journey being continued. It was begun by John, but being picked up again by Francis. And I would like to say a final word about these two men, who will be remembered, by the way, as popes of transition, as well as popes of tradition. And those two words are very important. Even though they lived in times that was so marked by a transitory nature, they never forgot the church from which they came. They were faithful to the tradition. In a recent article entitled Pope Francis's Radical Authenticity, author Elizabeth Brunig makes reference to this philosopher, Hannah Arendt, and the preface to her essay collection, Men in Dark Times. She wrote that even in the darkest times we have the right to expect some illumination. It may come less from theories and concepts than from the flickering light that some men and women in their lives and works will kindle under almost all circumstances. Now, Arendt was referring to John the 23rd in her piece. But Elizabeth Brunig believes the same comment can be applied to Francis. Amid the uncertainties of our time, Francis has emerged as a source of moral leadership, and he has been widely hailed as a Christian reformer in the style of John the 23rd. And much of his appeal appears to be rooted in his authenticity. That is the first thing that I can honestly say about it. He seems real. This is not a photo op. The kissing of the poor and the picking. This is something genuine that we're seeing in this man that is something to emulate, I think. His appeal is linked also with his genuine investment in the moral credibility of the church, something that many believe was damaged in recent years by the church sex abuse scandal, the problem with Vatican finances, the failure to adequately implement many of the teachings of Vatican II. Francis is someone they seem to believe in. They sense a nearness to him. He's one of us or something, a transparent pope with aspirations like those of Jesus, to whom he is commissioned to imitate. And this imitation, of course, means replicating the upsetment and the agitation induced by Jesus, as well as his unpretentious life. Francis seems to have succeeded on both counts. Many authors 50 years ago were writing about the John effect, the effect John the 23rd is having on whatever. Today they're writing about the Francis effect. We've heard about John Paul II priests, coming out of the seminary. One has to wonder, what will Francis priests look like coming out? We know what his cardinals appear to he wants them to look like. It will be interesting to see what he does with the impact he has on the seminary. But there's no question that his simplicity, his concern for the poor, and his obvious affection and compassion for the poor are basis for his, I think, future vision for the church and for his outspokenness on economic matters. When he was asked to, at one point recently about something strong he said about economics, he was asked, how do you justify that with the past tradition within your church? What you're saying about the poor and the whatever. In order to answer this question, he cited John the 23rd, who 1 month before the council opened in 1962 said the following: "The church reveals itself as it aspires to be. That is everyone's church, and particularly the church of the poor. Animated only by Jesus' words, the church wants to make its contribution to build a world where we look after one another and care for each other." Now, given what I confessed to you about me yesterday on the plane, these words are sticking in my throat. They really are. Because I'm not saying I can be perfect all the time. Of course I can't. But I read that and I think, yeah, I've got to work about that. But that's what he's talking about. This is the church we are being called to. A new Vatican II calls for a new humanism where we will be identified by our care for each other. God bless you. In her collection of essays, Men in Dark Times, Hannah Arendt admits that it is hard to say without retrospect whether the light cast by certain luminaries among us is the light of a candle or the light of a blazing sun. What kind of a mark are they going to leave? And to determine whether John or Francis will be remembered as a candle or a blazing sun, that will be the task of posterity to figure out, all right? But she claims what we can say is that the teachings and actions of these two men routinely defy the modern notion that we are doomed to the darkness of our times. Routinely defy that. In the 5th century sermon, St. Augustine said, "We make our times, such as we are, such are the times." If John the 23rd and Francis do have a momentous, lasting effect. It will show itself not in how they coped with their times, but rather in how they changed them. Thank you. Maybe I'll see some of you tonight. I would hope that. That would be great. Thanks so much for coming. And if I will send my talk